guys, and welcome back to the GSL Code A round of 48, day 1, part 2 with the Lone Wolf. Next up, we've got Sparta versus Fantasy, a TBT. And the first map is going to be on Daybreak. This will be Fantasy's first debut in the GSL. Now, take a look at this. Genius will actually play against the winner of Tasia versus Dark. And it has been announced, in fact, that Dark has joined SK Telecom T1. So that news is actually fully and officially out now. So tell your friends. In fact, speaking of SK Telecom, Slayer's Boxer himself is actually here in the studio, as SK Telecom is the team that Fantasy represents. And of course, the winner of that match will go on to play against Curious, who did fall down to the round 3 after his Code S defeat. So be sure to tune into that as Code A develops. Now, we already saw a pretty exciting match with Genius, able to knock out Eva, but this is where things really begin, I feel. Sparta versus Fantasy. Look at Fantasy's picture. If you just block everything out and look at the way he looks at the camera, that's how you know who he is. Sparta has some experience in the GSL, definitely a player to watch out for, but Fantasy in StarCraft 1 is, he's like MVP or something. I don't know how to draw a comparison. You really just can't. Fantasy is Fantasy. And people's fantasy was to see him in the GSL, but now Fantasy becomes reality. He's in the booth. He qualified from Code B. This is no seed. This is no fluke. I've seen a lot of Terran versus Terrans out of the sky. None of them extremely impressive just yet. His first opponent is going to be a little bit easier, I feel, than some of the other opponents he could have faced in the round of 48. We'll see if he can take out Sparta here. Obviously, just recently switching over, one of the Brood War players to keep playing StarCraft 1 even after his team switched to StarCraft 2. Making it really far in the final OSL. Now, here we go. Sparta versus Fantasy here at the GSL Code A, the Lone Wolf.
Over the radio and back up in the raves again. We got the crowd on the wave like it's a stadium. Call me the weatherman, it's about to be a break.
Up here to the top right from the next clan, and therefore formerly a ZenX player, currently plays for StarTale. He is
Sparta.
He makes his last stand with 200 supply, not 300. His opponent down here to the bottom left, very well known in StarCraft 1. See if he can make it happen in StarCraft 2. From the team SKT1, he is
SK Telecom T1 Fantasy.
And there you have him. Kind of hard to believe. Some people out there watching Brood War for a long time, seeing this guy now playing StarCraft 2. Now he's facing a gas first. Sparta goes gas first right away, and Fantasy on the other hand may go for a normally timed gas. We'll find out in just a moment. Not so yet. We'll see if we have gas first versus one reactive span. It's definitely something that Fantasy can easily hold. Winner prediction puts Fantasy at 80% nearly here. That's pretty notable if you think about the fact that this is his first appearance, whereas Sparta has a lot more experience. This Daybreak stat, not very significant. But you could say that Sparta is undefeated on this map. Fantasy sees the timing of the gas and starts his own gas immediately. It's interesting. Now, will he actually mine from it with 3 SCVs or only 1 and make a command center and then start mining from the refinery? He could do something like that to try to get his own starport tech out as soon as possible. The biggest concern generally against gas first in TBT when you go for a 1-axis span is, how am I going to defend against possible Banshees? How am I going to do that? You can, if you line everything up correctly, make the command center, then take your factory, then go into your starport, go Viking first, and still defend. But that's tough. And that's not something that Fantasy probably has a ton of experience dealing with. Checking around very carefully for proxies right now. When there's a gas first on the map, always want to be able to check for proxies. And this is really weird, by the way. Sparta going for a tech ladder. Could be for the fastest possible Banshee, and that is just what we're going to see. This actually has become the new way to go Banshee. Most people were not doing it this way back when this build first became popular. Fantasy makes his command center inside his main and starts his factory as well. Now, the way that Sparta has made his starport, it's going to finish up really, really fast, right on top of the tech lab. No switching of buildings required. And he's going to be able to start Cloak right away as well, as he did take double gas. Fantasy, with that faster gas, is easily going to have the Viking out in time. But with Cloak, it's going to be still pretty tough for him to defend here. He will need scans, or he's going to need an eBay. Potentially both. Sparta floating around with this Hellion, trying to get some information. 3 minions on top of a ramp, shut him down. Hellion's actually going to sneak around the other side, but this is exactly why Fantasy is pulled back, predicting this. He even makes a bunker on top of his ramp. Nothing is going to get by him. He's totally playing safe as he is. Look at that. He even chases the Hellion. Sparta's not going to let him have it. Now, from here, Sparta is still going to go ahead with the plan. No cancellations. Fantasy's going to start that Viking immediately. There it is. Now, with a Viking and a well-placed scan, you can kill each Banshee, and with 2 orbitals, Fantasy should be fine here, but he has to save a scan or 2. If he doesn't do that, then things are going to be a little bit risky for him. And in fact, he just scanned the main base of Sparta, and he sees the Cloak with that scan. And that's kind of it's an ironic scan when you do that, because you see the Cloak, but then you don't have the scan to defend yourself against it. But this is going to make it so that he saves all future scans. For example, this one, as Legend just highlighted, now has 70 energy, and by the time the Banshee gets there, he will have almost enough for 3 scans, including his orbital and his main. He's even starting a Raven right now, and a turret. Fantasy right now is actually just like a short person in chainmail. There's no way to get inside. Now he wants to wait until the last second. In fact, he just, with the turret, he decided to drop mules. And this is going to bite him a little bit. Almost has enough for a scan, but he wants to wait for the Raven. He needs to just keep his Marines away from the Banshee. The missile shots of that Viking miss when he flies out of the range. Notice that he actually goes into the range of the turret, then flies out just before the Viking shots hit. Now that the Raven is out, though, he's going to fly in here and run into those Marines. Damage done, not too significant. 8 workers killed, and unit killed in total is 9. It looks like he got 1 Marine with that. Damage the second. This second Banshee is going to be pretty lonely. It's going to probably hide off map for a little bit until that orbital is moved. And right now, I feel like Fantasy is actually ahead. The only thing that Sparta has going for him, really, is that he's got his orbital landing. And that's something Fantasy can change at any moment. He's being very patient, almost too patient, though, with his main base. He doesn't really need to have that in there that long. He starts his own Banshee, by the way, something I didn't mention just yet. He's going to go for some counter-harassment. And Sparta, actually, since he made this reactor, is probably going to start medevacs right away. Will not have any way of dealing with this if the Banshee is microed correctly. Sparta flies right into a trap. Not even a Cloak is going to help him here. Will escape, but not for long. If the Viking hunt is good, it's going to run out of energy eventually. He didn't split those units. Either way, this is not too significant. Banshee's not going to get too far. Now, as far as... Oh, that turret is going to finish us off. I mentioned that 1 kill there. As far as worker counts go, it's 35 to 34 in Fantasy's favor, and that's changing slightly here with this Banshee harassment. Both players getting siege mode. The Marine count and tank counts are basically dead to them. No real variation here between these 2 players as far as who's in the lead. It's a very even game, but this is changing right now with Fantasy actually getting some kills. He can actually fight these Marines with no stim and no Viking. Why not? It looks like he values the Banshee's life instead because he knows a Viking will probably come out very soon. He's going to try to save the Banshee. He wants to fight actually now over here. We'll get 1 more kill, and I think that's going to be the last one. Tries mine opening, gets 1 more. Can he get the mule? Goes for another SCV, and that's it. Fantasy takes the supply lead, but the worker count is now in his favor by 11. Pretty massive lead for him as he starts his third command center. Knows both players going into Marine Tank, and both of them with a pretty even timing on upgrades. Stim and +1 slightly ahead for Fantasy. And this could come into play. Not necessarily, but when you have that battle that occurs, sometimes when you know you have a Stim lead or you know you have a +1 lead, much harder to tell if you have a Stim lead, but if you click on your opponent's units, you can see if you have a +1 lead. That is a pretty huge way to take an engagement. He's looking for Banshees right now. He's going to find something even better, a full medevac. And yeah, the medevac's not going to be lost, but he's not going to be able to drop it off. And not seeing this could have been a disaster. Well, this is kind of weird how this is turning out. And Sparta, he's got a lot of siege tanks at home. I don't think Fantasy's going to be able to do a whole lot with this push. It's threatening, but it's not going to be successful. Consider, though, he does have Stim right now first, and the +1 effect is definitely going to come into play if they fight. Medevac is going to be safer here. He may have seen the Raven, he may not. These two Marines very unaware of each other. He picks up the medevac again, and now he thinks he knows where the army is. He's going to try to sneak around the south. And you guys can't see, but he's so far south, I don't think Fantasy's going to see this. All right, he does notice. And with the turret here and the Viking, this is not going to be a good situation. He's got so much auto turret energy as well. One of the first times I've ever seen an auto turret used like this. And the tank will come back. Meanwhile, the third base of Sparta is a problem here. The +1 I was talking about comes into effect, and he will get this command center. Wow. Coincidental here, but he has +1 faster. He was more on top of his macro, and he will get the orbital 100%. It's gone. Fantasy takes a 30 supply lead. He's got a ton of fans here in the studio right now, and they are very happy about what just happened. Claps all around. Sensor tower is up for Sparta to defend any drops coming from the left side, but he has a hole in his side right now, and he's leaking because Fantasy took out that command center. Fantasy has his own third. It's not placed yet, but it's done. Armory goes up, in fact, for Fantasy as well, so he can start his +2/2 upgrades a little bit faster than Sparta. Sparta is in trouble. He needs a key engagement. He needs Fantasy to make a mistake like walking into siege tanks or attacking a fortified position to get back into this game. Fantasy can go for a mega drop right now. Even though there's a sensor tower there, it could be chaotic. Looks like he just wants to attack into this. And that's probably what Sparta is hoping for, because if Fantasy attacks into this, it's not going to be an efficient trade. Both of them are on even upgrades right now, both with combat shield, Stim, and +1. +1 armor a little bit ahead for Fantasy, but just slightly. The key here is that Fantasy has his third orbital landing. Third orbital for Sparta has not even been restarted. Scan reveals those tanks, and Fantasy says, I'm going home. At the very least, he's going to have to find a different angle of attack. This is not going to work. And Sparta's going to be disappointed with this. Wanted to face him in an advantageous defender's advantage position. +2 is started way faster for Fantasy here for weapons. He's also going to be able to start +2 armor right away. The armory of Sparta lands right before his armor, so his timing here is not bad. It's not off, but it's still behind. Fantasy just trying to check to see if there's a third command so he can grab and snipe or force a cancel on, but there's nothing. He scans again. He's like, well, I'm looking for something. If you leave one weak point, I will take you on. Uh-oh, this is a bit too far forward. Fantasy needs to do the scan here. That medevac changes everything. Marine tank, some siege tank fire. That's something that I feel less people do than actually should be doing. If you run 2 Marines forward, they will actually eat that tank fire instead. Those 2 medevacs in the middle are spotters. Look at the income rate here. Obviously, it varies quite heavily based on mule availability. Fantasy has that extra gas. That's the most important part. This is going to allow him to make 2 siege tanks at a time. Look at the production tab alone. If you look at that production tab, you can see a vast difference. Who has +2 on the way? Who has +1 for siege tanks? If you answered Fantasy, you're correct. Sparta, like I said, he's playing with a hole in the side, and he's going to take a massive risk here, and I don't think that was spotted. Yeah, no, he doesn't know. Now he knows, though, and this is so important. He's going to go for the attack. He knows so many of his opponent's units are out of position. He runs in here before +2, in fact, but it looks like it's not going to matter. The SCVs are pulled way too late. Does he have enough at home? These tanks are not ready. They siege up now. The auto turret's there, and GG. The drop is not enough, and Fantasy takes game number 1 in his first GSL match. WIN spells win. He was just a little bit ahead with his upgrades. He took that early battle, took out that orbital. He played like a turtle. Imagine if you had a turtle shell where you poked out another shell and then the head came out. That's how Fantasy played the early game there. No weak points. In fact, when he saw the gas first, he did what almost no players do. And he made a gas, a late gas, and then made his command center on the high ground. And then made a turret and a Raven. He got his +1 out a little bit faster. And when he made his third command center, he made it later and he made it near his army. That's something that Sparta did not do. Sparta took a risk and moving that command center over early. Fantasy saw it and punished him. A cool game, but nonetheless, obviously, Fantasy getting a very early lead there, making Sparta, basically try to mop up the pieces for the rest of the game. Did not work out. Had a very brief shot of the Emperor himself coming in, giving some advices, of course, to Fantasy. Map number 2 is going to be Antigua Shipyard for this Terran versus Terran. The countdown is finishing up here. Sparta not looking very happy about his results thus far, but he can turn this around. This is not over for him, but he has to win this game. He's got to get himself together. Does he play a more aggressive style like we saw in game number 1? Does he play more passive and go for the late game against Fantasy? A little bit less experience in StarCraft 2. A lot of tough choices coming up for the former next clan member, Sparta. Will he be able to tie the series? We're going to find out right now. The map is up and loaded. This is the GSL Code A, brought to you, of course, by the Lone Wolf today. See you guys on Antigua Shipyard.
All over the radio and back up in the raves again. We got the crowd on the wave like it's